Hey, hello everybody. How's it going? Welcome to the live stream. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm a senior developer advocate here at Postman, and today I'm joined by Isaac, another developer relations, but on a different team. So Isaac, why don't you introduce yourself? Let us know where you're from, what group you're working with, how long you've been a Postman, all that good stuff.
Hello, everyone. So nice to meet you all. Thank you, Ian. My name is Isaac, and I'm a developer advocate on the Postman Student Programs team. Coming live to you from New York. And I've been at Postman for almost about a year now. And I'm always love to tune into these streams that Ian and Devrel have, as well as hosting streams with student programs. And I'm really excited for what we have in store for you today.
Yep, should be a lot of fun. So tell us a little bit about the student group and like what the student team does. Like how are you involved in that? Like what is the student team?
Yeah, so essentially, Postman Student Programs is designed to promote API literacy amongst students and educators. So, Postman's mission is, as you may know, we're pushing APIs as the foundation of modern day software development. We push ourselves as an industry standard API platform. And student programs is designed to give students and educators new opportunities to learn and share the astounding power of APIs through our three programs: our student expert program, our Postman student leader program, and our classroom program.
Sweet. Awesome. We had a question come in. Can we get a recording of this? So we put all of our live stream videos up on YouTube. So it'll be available for a little while on Twitch and LinkedIn, but we put all of these videos up on YouTube afterwards. So yeah, you'll be able to come back and review that at any point. Um, so yeah, the student team is you stream pretty much every week with the student team, don't you?
Yeah,
Pretty
so
regularly.
we Ruby, my my teammate Ruby and I, we host the student program stream on a biweekly basis. We
Oh, by the way.
recently changed our schedule to be once a month, but we
Okay.
will have a stream later this month.
Okay, awesome. And I've actually been a part of that stream, so it was great being involved there. Thought I'd reciprocate and have you on the stream over here as well. And so some folks are asking for like the YouTube handle and so on. So on YouTube, I believe the YouTube channel is just Postman, but on Twitch it's Get Postman. And so if you go to youtube.com/postman, you should be able to get to the live stream over on YouTube as well. Um, Awesome. Well, and there's Ruby hanging out in chat as well. So kudos to Ruby Isaac was telling me before we went live. Ruby does a lot of work as far as like organizing and like getting that live stream up and running. So we've
Yeah,
had Ruby on the stream and we've done intergalactics and things like that with Ruby as well.
I know you said shout outs come at the end, but I wanted to say congrats again to Ruby for being named one of the most on the list of 100
Yeah.
tech women to follow and listen to. Congrats again, Ruby. She
Heck
is
yeah.
awesome.
Yep. Go give Ruby a follow on LinkedIn and Twitch and so on. Ruby's a fantastic person to get to know. Awesome. Well, today we're going to chat a little bit about mock servers and what mock servers are in Postman. I put together kind of a mock server starter kit that we're going to go through, and we're going to kind of step through that a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about RESTful APIs and GraphQL APIs. But before we go too deep into it, we like to start all of our streams with "In Case You Missed It." And this is basically a segment where we talk about like what came out in Postman since we streamed last. Our DevRel team streams. We try to stream every week, and so we tend to do like release notes and like big blog posts and things like that came out. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the changes that just came out since last Friday. Um, and so if you caught our live stream a couple of weeks ago where we were doing the sentiment analysis and the IoT lights, we were working with the Flows product inside of Postman. And I'm just going to close chat here for just a moment. And actually, let me change to this one here so you can see a little bit more on my screen. And so we were working in Flows, and we were talking a little bit about this Flows query language a little bit. And so the team has actually released that now. They've actually got some artificial intelligence now in this query, and so it's some pretty interesting stuff that you can build in into Flows and so on if you're So you'll be able to like get the request and say, go find all the responses that had a driver's license as part of their user information, that sort of thing. So it's got some pretty interesting things that you can do. We've also released a new GraphQL interface, so we'll be taking a look at some of that today. We've got a whole blog post about it that came out last Thursday, and this is basically all the changes and why we built GraphQL support into Postman. So there's a lot of information in that blog post. I'll drop these links in chat here in a minute. Actually, I'll go ahead and drop this one in chat here right now. So this is a blog post on GraphQL. And for those asking about the recording and so on, the recording will be available on Twitch and LinkedIn for a little while that you can go back and rewatch. But we put all this stuff up on our YouTube channel. So if you check out youtube.com/postman, you'll have access to all of our videos from there. So we built quite a lot into GraphQL. We've basically revamped the GraphQL client. And so there's a big blog post from Sterling and all the work that team has been putting in. The actual main Postman blog, we've had a number of new blogs come out. And this one, Isaac, you were also really excited about. We're actually going to be part of Google Summer of Code this year. Isaac, have you ever participated in Summer of Code?
Oh, I've heard so much about it. I've never gotten a chance to participate, but it's a really awesome program to be in.
Yeah. So we're excited that we're going to be back in there again as a mentoring organization. And so if you're using a tool like Postman in your Google Summer of Code, we'll have some mentors on hand, and you can see some of the projects and some of the involvement that we're going to be in there. And all of these are available on the Postman blog. The last one that I wanted to kind of show off is we've expanded a little bit of work with the gRPC APIs. We've got Shobit from the gRPC group. I talked to Shobit and the team about like how did we build gRPC into Postman, and they've written a blog post now about some of the changes that they've made there, some of the improvements to documentation and so on. So as you're building out examples, that'll automatically build into your API documentation in Postman for gRPC. And so you can go check all of that stuff out in our blog. So that was just part of the release notes. We've also been working on the back end a little bit on the Postman side of the back end, the cloud and so on, to make things a little bit faster and some improvements and so on there, some bug fixes. And so you can go check out all those release notes. So we've had quite a bit come out in the last little while. So that's in case you missed it. Let's go back and we'll keep chat turned back on here a little bit. So what we're going to be chatting about today, like I said, we're gonna talk a little bit about mock servers. But before we go too deep into like how to actually build out a mock server, let's talk about why we have mock servers. So Isaac, what do you know about like the API first sort of mentality that we talk about at Postman, and things like API contracts? Like what have you kind of heard, or what have you worked in around those terms? Like how would you define that?
Yeah, definitely. So essentially, API first is the mindset that, before you go and start developing your software, you want to define, design, and document an application or software around your API. And that's what the mindset is. And essentially you want to use something called the API contract, which is an agreement that says, here's how my API is going to be designed, and if I make any changes, I'm going to communicate that with my API consumers. So quick short example, let's say you're designing and let's say you have an API that's being consumed by ride sharing services or apps like Uber and Lyft, and you make a change to your API, but you don't tell them that. Suddenly the response is that your consumer is going to get weird or something totally different, which can have an impact on a service like that. So just as a short example, that's what we mean by the API first mindset. So with a great tool like Postman mock servers, it's a great way to essentially use Postman to build an API as part of this API first mindset, and essentially test your API experience before you develop any software for the API itself.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. Well, that's basically what we're going to be kind of working through today is how do we talk about what that API contract is going to be? How do we sort of shape that? How do we plan that? And then how do we imagine like if you were say the backend developer and I'm a front end developer, if I'm trying to build out a UI and you haven't even built the API yet, do I sit around and kind of twiddle my thumbs? Do I find other things to go work on while you scramble and rush and, to go build out this API? If we can agree on an API contract, I could get started. But if I'm just kind of building against a theoretical API contract, where we've got it kind of documented out, like when I hit this endpoint, you're going to send me back, JSON that looks something like this, or however we're passing that data. It's probably a JSON though. Um, if even if we've got that documented, that's a much better step than just trying to guess at what's coming back. But when we sit down and we plan this stuff out, what we can do is we can actually inside of Postman is we can actually plan out the API contract as saved examples to existing requests, and then from there we can actually build out a mock server, and that mock server then will serve back those saved examples that we build out. And then what I can do as a front end developer is I can then go hit that mock server and I can actually start building against that mock server. And similarly, if you're a backend developer and you're consuming, say, another third-party API or even another API for your API to do some work. So another example would be like if I'm building a weather app and I'm calling your API and you're going out and you're calling like various kinds of like temperature data and humidity data or whatever to go build your API. Maybe you need to go hit other APIs as well as the backend developer. And so you can actually follow a similar kind of thing where, while you're waiting for those APIs, or maybe those APIs are rate limited or they cost a lot of money, and so you don't want to hit them too often, is you can also spin up a mock server. And now as you're developing your API, you can hit a mock server as well. And it'll give you back those same saved examples. So a lot of third-party APIs, when you go hit that API, they'll have an example of like, this is what the response is going to look like. This is what the request is that you send us. This is what we're going to send you back in response. Is you can actually build those things out as examples. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to talk Isaac through a little bit of this, and I'm going to show how to do some of this in the Postman desktop application around like how do we start planning this stuff out a little bit. And so you're welcome to follow along if you like. We'll drop links into how to get into some of this. But we're going to be starting with this collection. I'm going to drop this in chat right now. So this collection is my mock server starter kit. And there's a lot of documentation that you can read in here. And the first thing that you're going to need is you're going to need to log into Postman and actually build a workspace that you can fork this collection into your own workspace. And yes, we'll zoom in as much as we can on the demo when we're going through this. And so this mock server starter kit, there's a lot of documentation in here about how to actually fork things over, how to start building out the environment, and so on. So the idea is that when we're building out this in a developer type of mode, is that we want to start with an environment where we know the URL that we want to go hit so that we can change our environment at any time. And then we can come back in and say, okay, well, I want to do it in development mode, or I want to hit the mock server, or I want to go hit like an actual production server, a staging server, things like that. And so Postman has a little drop down in the interface that will show you where you can kind of swap in between those environments as we're building this out. And so we're going to do REST APIs. We're going to do GraphQL APIs. If we have time, we'll talk a little bit about gRPC and how gRPC also has mocking. We may not get into that depending on the questions that we have in chat. So if you've got questions as we go through this, absolutely drop those in chat. We'll address those kind of as we go. So let's jump over to Postman. So I'm in the desktop application in Postman right now, and I'm just going to keep the chat off for now. But if I see questions come in, we'll definitely bring them over the screen here, and we'll address those as they come in. So the first thing that we're going to do is in the search bar at the top is we're going to search for the mock server starter kit. And you want to find the mock server starter kit that was generated by the Postman DevRel team. So you want to make sure that you're picking this one. This is going to go to where we have all that documentation that I just mentioned. So there's a lot of documentation on here. I like to click this link at the bottom. Actually, you can't see because my picture's in the way. But there's a link at the bottom here that says view the complete collection documentation. I like to have that open because it opens a whole tab up here in the interface with just the documentation. So I'm gonna keep that on the screen here just to get started. And so you can see there's introduction and documentation about both REST as well as GraphQL as well. As far as the zoom level, I can't zoom in too much farther or it's going to make the UI like really, really bad. So this is about as much as I can zoom in. If you're having a hard time seeing it, then you can go back and you can always watch this on YouTube later and you can kind of expand that interface out a little bit more. Someone's asking, how can you test mobile? So mobile would be a similar kind of thing where if you're building out a mobile app and you're trying to hit a server, within your mobile app, you'd have to have a way to kind of change back and forth between using a real server and using a mock server. So you might need like a beta version of the app or like a mock version, like a mock server version of the app. Or some sort of mechanism within the app where you can actually change from one server to the other, to where you're either in development mode or you're hitting the mock server. But that would be one way that I would probably do the like a mobile testing for something like that. We had another question come in about supporting deviceless testing. I probably need a little more context about that. Isaac, have you heard the term deviceless testing before?
Good question. Do they mean, is that similar to serverless? I haven't heard deviceless before. I know about serverless though.
Yeah, I know about serverless. I've never heard of deviceless. We probably need a little bit more information about that. Someone
Maybe
else
one
has
day we won't
asked.
need iPhones.
Yeah, that'd be nice. How can we build end-to-end scenarios? So, so we'll talk a little bit about testing as we come in and we kind of get started with what our API contract is going to be. Once we have an API contract, we'll have the ability then to go into Postman and actually write tests and say, you know, now that I've got this endpoint, I expect this collection to have, or this response to have a certain kind of data structure about it. And that would allow you to then to start testing out those things. As far as the end-to-end integration type testing, you can certainly build out, like as you have all the different requests and so on, you can build out deeper scenarios around advanced testing. We've got other videos that you can go explore about that. You can go check out our YouTube channel. We also do a regular intergalactic, which is our webinar-based education that we do once a month as the DevRel team, as well as Isaac and Ruby. You do a lot of like API education and things like that as well around testing and how to build out APIs and so on. So you can absolutely go check out those videos as well. Someone was also saying Postman's not working properly in Windows 11. So I'm on Windows 11 right now, and I'm in the Postman app, and it's I hate to be the it works on my machine guy, but I'm actually on Windows 11 right now, and it's working okay. So I would say maybe check our community support for that if you're having problems in Windows 11, and maybe someone in the community can help out.
I hate to be that guy, Ian, but maybe the problem is Windows.
I mean, possibly, but I mean, I work in Windows 11 like all day, and I have pretty good success with Postman right now. So
Mac.
yeah. Oh, so they're saying it takes a lot of their CPU time, which I get. So that would be definitely something to raise with the support team and try to see what's going on there. All right, so this is the starter kit. This is where we're going to get started. And we've got steps on here about how to fork this into a workspace. So the first thing we're going to need is a workspace that we can build this in. So we're going to go build a brand new workspace. And what are we going to call this? We'll call this live stream mock demo. And we'll make it public right now that everybody can come in and view this. And I'll show some of the considerations about like when you call an API, like what not to do if you have a public facing workspace like this. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go. So I'm going to create that workspace. Now I need to go back to the mock server starter kit, and we're going to fork this into the workspace that I just made. And so that's part of the documentation that we can see in here about how to fork this over. So what we want to do is we want to go find that collection. So the workspace where this mock server starter kit exists, there's a lot of other stuff in this collection. So we want to make sure that we find the mock server starter kit from here. We're going to click on these three dots. And the first thing we're going to do is create a fork. And we're going to fork this over. Yeah, I'll just call it Ian for now. And we're going to fork this over to my live stream mock demo workspace. And what this is going to do now is if I, as the owner of the actual mock server starter kit, if I make a change, if you leave that checkbox selected saying you want to get notified of changes, you'll see a little thing up here in the notification bell in the top of the UI, and it'll basically let you know that there's some changes, and then you'll be able to pull those changes down. That's the nice thing about forking the stuff, is it remembers the reference of where you got it from. It'll actually pull that work down. You can kind of merge it in like a typical code merge. All right, so Isaac, let's talk a little bit more again about what environments would be for. So what's your experience with using an environment setting for like setting variables and so on?
Yeah, so of course, like I've used Postman before creating environments where I can also create variables that can be used in my collection. And a nice thing about environments is that in Postman, you can use variables that can be used across your collections. And let's say you made let's say you made a variable, you gave it a value from within the environment. That same value can be used all across. So let's say you're working on something like you create a collection, and at the end, you want to add authorization to it using an API key that you made from inside your environment. You can just as easily call back to that variable that you made when you set up your environment, and that you can add authorization with that one key in all your collections just with the power of Postman environments.
Yep. And so what we've got in the user interface, excuse me, is we have a drop down that you can access here in the UI. Right now, there are no environments set up in this workspace, but it would allow us to set up like a development environment, a mock environment, and so on. And so we're going to kind of step through a little bit of how to do that. So we're going to get started over here in the context bar on the left. We're going to go to environments, and we're going to create a new environment here. And we're going to call this one our development mode. So I'm just going to call it dev for now. And maybe we need like a host name or something as our variable. Now, depending on whether you want to do REST APIs or GraphQL APIs, I've actually got two different variables that I talk about in the documentation. And so we're going to call one of them echo URL, and the other one we're going to call Spotify URL. But you can just as easily call this, for example, this one could be like our REST URL, and this one could be like a GraphQL URL. I'll just put all this lowercase for now, so GraphQL URL. So we're going to have two different URLs for this. So if you're going to, if you want to work through like building out a mock server for REST, you can use a variable. For the live stream, we'll call it REST URL. But in the documentation here, if you're following through the information here, you'll see that it's actually called echo URL for REST and Spotify URL for GraphQL. So I think for the sake of following along, I'm going to call them the same thing here. So echo URL and Spotify URL. So I'm actually going to go grab this URL right here because I know the other one. And so I'm going to call this echo URL. And this is going to be our REST API, and then our GraphQL we called Spotify URL. Now, when it comes to, so I mentioned when you build these things out in a public workspace, what to do, what not to do. When you're building out a public workspace, anything that you set in initial value in this column is going to get synchronized to the Postman cloud. And so even if I set this to a secret value that you can't see what I type, if you're on a public workspace that other people can access, they can always come in here and they can click this icon, this little eyeball icon over here, and be able to see what it is you typed in. So they'll be able to unmask what you put in, even though we made it a secret value. If you put it in initial value, other people can unmask what you've typed in there. Anything that you type in current value is stored within your local environment, and the current value does not get synchronized over to Postman. So I could set this to something else, and now only my environment is going to use this value called something else. So if there's no current value, it'll use initial value, but initial value gets synchronized up to the Postman cloud. And so if you're storing things like API keys, you don't want to store those in initial value. You just want to leave that empty for now. Or you can put in a message here, like, set your API key here or something like that. Like you can put a message to people that they know that they have to set it. But we like to tell people if it's something sensitive, you don't necessarily want to put it in initial value unless it's a private workspace where you know that no one else but your organization can access it. Otherwise, people can come in here and they can unmask that. So we're going to set these to default right now.
That was super important. Thank you for sharing that, Ian.
Yeah, just from a security point of view, we want to make sure that that people have that information. So, all right. So we need the Postman Echo, which I think is postmanecho.com, right? And this is our Echo server, which is basically anything you send to it, it's going to send back to you. And we'll get to see some examples of this. Now, why are we doing this? So we kind of started the stream talking about, like, Isaac and I are working on an API. So why are we calling these other APIs? Like if we're building out a restaurant API, why are we calling Spotify? Or if we're building out like a library, why are we calling this Postman Echo? This is the step here that we're doing is as you're planning out your API contract, it's nice to have like a model of data that you can actually access, that you can then go in and shape how you want your API contract to actually be. And so this is literally just an example of go hit a real API, get a response back, and then we can start making copies of those saved responses. So if Isaac and I were trying to plan out an API, and let's say, Isaac, you're doing the back end and you haven't even built anything yet. This is just saying, well, let's go hit any API just to get a response back long enough that we can save some examples and start building out these mock servers. So that's the only reason that we're calling these APIs right now. Later on, we can change these out to be our actual API. But for the development mode and kind of the planning stage of planning out what our API contract is going to be, we're going to go hit someone else's API just so we can start forming the structure a little bit here. Someone is asking in chat, do we have to build the request manually or is it built automatically? We will be building these manually. We have some examples in the mock server starter kit around like the different HTTP methods, but we're basically going to be going through and we're going to build this stuff out manually.
Awesome. Yeah. I wanted to highlight what you said about using examples, Ian. I think it's like, that's so cool that you can modify those. You can save the response as an example, modify it, and then, start working from there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So one thing you'll notice is as you're working in Postman, whether you're in the web browser or on the desktop version, if you see this little dot showing up in the tab, that means you have unsaved work. And so that's kind of our notification of like, hey, you may want to like save this. So you can click on save, or if you're on a Mac, you can hit Command S. If you're on a PC, you can hit Control S, and it'll save that for you. Also, fairly recently, we introduced customizable like keystroke patterns. So you can actually go in and customize what those keystrokes are. So if you're in a browser, for example, if you're Control S or Command S, if it actually tries to save the whole page, then you can go in and you can customize the hotkey that you hit to actually trigger a save to happen inside of Postman, where it won't conflict with your browser's keyboard controls. So you can go in and you can customize those things as well. All right, so now that we've got these, what we can do now is we can go back to the collection level and we can actually start accessing some of these. So in the collection, we see we've got a bunch of examples for REST endpoints, and I've got one example for each of those like 5 common HTTP methods like get, post, put, patch, delete. GraphQL, though, only uses post, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is as we get into GraphQL. But we're going to start with REST, and then we'll move on to GraphQL. So again, depending on what it is you're trying to mock out, you'll have some flexibility here about whether you want to use the REST endpoints or the GraphQL endpoints. All of these things are fully documented though. So we've got all the documentation here at the collection level, but these are pretty high level steps. If you want the actual documentation for what you need to do with the REST endpoints or the GraphQL endpoints, this is also documented. If you click on the folder inside the collection, there will be more specific information just about like this is what you need to set up for the REST. Or if you click on the GraphQL one, here's the more specific information that you need for the GraphQL. Cool. So let's start with just one of our REST endpoints here. So we made that echo URL, but if you can discern the color red, you'll notice that our echo URL right now is unresolved. But we set that in our environment. But the reason that this is unresolved is because we actually haven't chosen an environment from up here. So I'm going to pick our dev environment up here in the top corner, and now you'll see if you can discern the change. It went from red to orange, which is pretty subtle of a change. But now when we hover over the echo URL, we can actually see it found that value from our environment. And now we can go ahead and we can send this over. So again, by calling the Postman echo service, it's basically giving us back this payload of data here that's just echoing back, okay, you sent me param1 value 1, and then it gives us a little bit more information about, you know, cookies and headers and things like that, if any. And it basically just echoes all of this back as a response. Now, if Isaac, if you and I were kind of planning out what our API was going to be here, then what we can do from here is we can use this control over here on the side that says save the response. What we want to do here is we want to save this as an example. And then we can talk a little bit about what we want to actually save in this example. And so we'll see over here in the collection now we've got this example here. So let's call this one like success with param1. So you can be as descriptive as you want on the name of that example, and it'll change the example name up here. But now, Isaac, what you and I can do is we can actually start planning out what our API contract is going to be. So we've had several live streams and intergalactic sessions. We just had another one recently with Arnaud. I did one with Arnaud back in January where we were kind of planning out an API. Pooja just did another one with Arnaud where they were talking about like good API design. But Isaac, what kind of API are we going to pretend to build out today? So we're not actually going to go build the API, but if we were going to plan out like what we were going to build as our API, what would be an example of like a GET request that we would do?
Yeah, for sure. So I really liked the idea that you brought up earlier about like calling to a restaurant, like making a restaurant API and getting like, you know, that kind of data back. So
Okay.
let's get like one restaurant from the, let's make a request for like a restaurant from like a food suggesting app. So
Okay.
I think like first thing we can get is the name of the restaurant.
Okay. So one thing that we're going to need to do is part of the API contract is actually talking about the route that we're actually going to hit. Now for the Postman echo, you'll notice the GET request goes to /get. The post request is going to go to /post. But when you actually build out a REST API, that's not actually going to be the route. We only need that route temporarily for the Postman echo. But what would we do here? Like, do we want to call it like what are we going to get here? Are we going to get the menu? Or are we going to get the hours of operation? Like what is our endpoint here going to be? Like what are we fetching from the server?
Let's get the menu.
Okay. So let's call this like /menu. And then maybe the params, maybe we can change out these params and we can do something like we can sort by what's your favorite style of food? Like, do you eat vegan or do you want meat based?
I like meat, so let's sort
like
by
meat? Okay.
the meat dishes.
All right, so we'll sort by meat. So we're imagining like these are parameters that we could potentially send, and then we'll get some data back, and then we'll plan out like what our actual menu looks like here. And this is our API contract. We're planning out like these are the things that we could get back as our response. And so maybe we've got an array of objects, and that object has like the name of the dish. What's your favorite meat-based dish? We'll start putting in some information here.
Filet mignon.
Very tender cut of beef, not a lot of flavor. I'm more of a ribeye kind of guy. But we'll say that the fillet, we'll call that $45, and maybe we've got a description in here. Again, this is just us planning out like this is what our API could be. So we don't have to get too you know, into the planning here for the sake of our live stream, but this would be the kind of step that you would be taking with your team, where you're actually planning out like all the nitty gritty detail of this is exactly what I want to get back in the response. And so we'll have the description of tender cut of beef, not much flavor. And so then you can plan out, okay, you know, let's imagine we had an array of these objects coming back. So now we can save this example. And now we have an example of if we were to call our menu and we want to sort by meat only dishes or something like that, then we could get this response back. Now, one thing that I like to teach about when I do these mock servers is, you know, if I'm the front end developer and I'm trying to build out the front end of this restaurant, you know, application, I probably also want to cover error conditions. Like what happens if we don't have any meat options on there? Or what happens if somebody tries to sort by, you know, like just gibberish or something like that? Like how can I build out a good user experience if there's an error? Or what if the API is offline or we get an error or something from the server? How do I handle that gracefully so that I can give my user a good user experience? And so one thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to click on the three dots next to our success. I'm going to duplicate this, but I'm going to call this like an error condition of some kind. So we're going to say internal server error. And one of the things that we can do here, so let's just set this to like some gibberish here for a second. One of the things that we can do with these saved examples is we can actually change the status code. And as you start typing in numbers, it'll actually give you like the whole status code back. And now we can also mock out error conditions about, you know, how do we want to handle a scenario where, you know, something went bad. Something happened on our side. It's not you. Sorry, try again later. And so we can now actually mock out an error condition as well. Now, if you're a front-end developer, this could be really invaluable for you to make sure that you're building out the best user experience possible by planning for when something doesn't work. So now when we actually go build our mock server, we can say, okay, if I'm sorting by, you know, this particular type of food, I know I'm going to get a 500 back. And so we know that if we search for meat, we're going to get a success, but maybe we're going to search for what's your least favorite type of food, Isaac?
I would say salad.
All right. So if we search for meat, we're going to get success. If we search for salad, we're going to get an error.
Sounds good to me.
So this again is a way that I can now go build up my whole application. And if I've got a search in there, I can say, okay, when I search for meat, I know I'm going to get success. If I search for salad, I know I'm going to get failure. And so now within my app, I know if I search for salad, it's going to pretend that I'm getting an error, and now I can actually handle that properly within my application. And so I think it's really important to do this when you're in this API contract planning stage, is to also plan for error conditions. Also plan like when things go badly, because things will go badly. Something could be offline and so on. Someone's also asking like, what about slow connections? So we do have some snippets of testing code that you can add that say, you know, if this whole request took more than say 200 milliseconds, do something, or I expect this to take less than 100 milliseconds. You can do that sort of thing. Now, from the mock server point of view, though, we don't have the intelligence in the Postman mock server to say like pretend that this one's really slow. that's still a user experience that you're going to have to account for within your own application. So if this request is just coming back really slowly, that's something that you're going to have to account for in your application. We wouldn't have a good way to build that out when it comes to the mock servers here.
Hey, Ian,
But
I
great
have
question, though. Yeah, go ahead.
so this is back on what we did earlier when you first saved the response as an example. So I wanted to take note of something very, very important that stood out to me. So when you first saved the response as an example, what were all the things that were saved in that response that we were able to manipulate to create our own API?
Yeah, great question. So, obviously we changed the body. We can change the status code here, but we can also we can see the headers that are coming back as well, and we can actually change the header information, I think, as well as part of that response. I think we can also come in here and we can say, imagine we want to set a particular kind of cookie, or you probably don't want to manipulate the content type and the content length, but if you're passing back a date or if you're passing back some headers, then you can also send, or you can also store these headers as part of the response as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess like also I'm also taking note that the request method, the URL, and the status code, those are all saved as part of the example. And those are things
Mm-hmm.
that I guess we can use to determine later on which response to work with in our mock server. I know that's coming later, but I think that's pretty cool just to note out as well.
Yep. So again, with the REST endpoints, because the echo service that we're hitting actually needed /get, that's not typically the path that you would actually be building out. Like you might have /user/50 or something like that. If you're going to go fetch user number 50, maybe that's your success. But if you try to search for, user 12 or something, that's your 500 error code or something like that. So you want to plan for like 404s, like plan for your 400 errors, which means the user did something wrong. You want to plan for 500 level errors, which means something happened on the server side. Someone was also asking about server timeouts. And so again, if you come in here and you change this, that would be like a 502 bad gateway or timeout, things like that. You can save as many of these examples as you'd like, and you'll have the flexibility of coming in. So if we look at the 500, so we got internal, not implemented bad gateway. Oh, there's your gateway time. It was 504. That's something timed out. So this would mean like, okay, if I search for salad, I know I'm gonna be getting back like a mock, something actually timed out on the back end. And so maybe within your application, then you can say, okay, if I get a 504, maybe I retry again and I say, I let my user know a good experience and say, we're still looking for that information or something. Like you can plan for a better user experience around that. So you can set these status codes to anything that we've already got kind of pre-selected. Again, as you start typing in the number, you start typing in the text, we'll autocomplete that status code for you. And then we're going to save that. Now, if you want to do a post, for example, maybe we're going to go create an order or something like that. So we'll go send over our first like actual request to the Postman echo. Now that we get this back, now we can actually manipulate what we were trying to send over and what we're getting back as a response. This is one of my favorite nerdy sort of restaurant jokes. We ran out of flatbread. We don't want you to talk about it on social media, so please sign this non-disclosure agreement. I'm a big fan of dad jokes, so you will see some of those from time to time.
No.
But again, with the Postman echo, it's just giving you back like this is a response. So in this case, we didn't have parameters. In this case, we had a body of data come over. And so now, again, we can save this response as an example, and we can say, we'll call this one success, but maybe we're going to send this over to like orders or something like that. So we're going to have an endpoint for, saving our order. Now, this can be a little bit different from what, if you watch the intergalactic sessions with Arnaud, where we're planning all of this stuff out very meticulously using like OpenAPI, for example. You would be planning this out from like the OpenAPI perspective and planning out all of that. Sometimes though, you just need to get in the nitty gritty and say like, if I call this endpoint, I want to get this data back. So it's a little bit different take on planning out the API contract. But again, in here, we could be planning out like, this is what the actual data is. This is what comes back from the server. And in this case, in the saved example, we're actually saving the request that went out. So if a request matches all of this, we want to make sure that we get this back. And so again, you can also manipulate what gets sent out as the body and what comes back with the header here as part of that saved example. So we want to make sure that we that we plan for this kind of stuff with the route. Now, the way that our mock servers work is we will try to match the verb that you use, so the HTTP method. So in this case, get, post, put, patch, delete. We're also going to try to match on the URL that you're sending, as well as any parameters that you're sending. But by default, the Postman mock server will not look at the body that you're sending over. And so one of the things that we're going to have to do here is we're actually going to have to manipulate some headers that lets the Postman mock server know that we also want to match what we're sending over in the body of what we're sending. And this will come into play when we get into GraphQL as well.
Hey, Ian,
Otherwise it won't match. Yeah.
I have another question on examples.
Sure.
So let's say you have multiple examples. How can you save them? Like, how can you basically save them so that when you are calling them using the mock server, that the mock server knows, okay, I want this type of response, this type of success. The user asked for salad, so I want to get back this response versus the filet mignon one. What are specifics, I guess, like to specify for a unique example?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, the Postman mock server for the rest of the GraphQL, it's I don't want to call it dumb because there's a lot of intelligence that's happening on the Postman cloud side of things to make these things match. But it's very much like, look at what I'm sending over in my request and try to find a match and then send back that response. And so it starts by using the first three elements that I just mentioned. So it's using the HTTP method. So get, post, put, patch, delete. It's also trying to match the URL, which would include the route of what you're passing over here. So if you had a bunch of post endpoints or a bunch of get endpoints, like maybe get the menu and maybe get my order status and maybe get my receipt or something like that. Like you can have a lot of different get requests, and so it's going to look at the path as well, and then any parameters that you send over. So those are the three things that the mock server right now are going to look at. But in this case, when we get into post and put and patch, you're also sending a body of data over. And so we actually have to tell the mock server, like, hey, I want you to pay attention to what's in the body here as well, and make sure that we're matching what I send over in the body to make sure that we're getting a match. And so we actually have to manipulate a couple of things here. So the first thing that we have to manipulate is in the header is we want to add a key here. And these are specific just to the Postman mock server. So you won't necessarily need to send these when you actually build out your production system. You won't need to send these. But if you're going to hit the mock server, you will need to add this header here called x mock match request body. And there's dashes in between all those words. And you want to set that to a true value. Because when we send this over to the mock server, we need to tell the mock server, hey, I also want you to pay attention to the body that I'm sending over in order to find that match. So to go back and answer your question, typically it will not match on the body, but it'll try to match all those other things. So if you got a lot of requests, how does it actually line those up? It's using the verb and the URL and parameters. We also want to tell it like, hey, I also want to match on the body here as well.
Awesome.
So there's some other ones in here as well. If you also want to match any of the headers that you're sending over, then you can do that as well.
We have another great question from Saya.
Yeah, let me pull that one up here. Does the mock server work like a microserver to expose the API collection to a consumer? A little bit, yeah. So it's basically it's a mocking what your actual API would be. So you're not actually building out a real API. So you wouldn't use this to send back like actual like API data because we don't have your database. We don't have like whatever processing you would be doing in order to come and actually shape out this exact sort of response that you'd be sending back from the server. This is literally like we're just planning out, if I call this endpoint, I get this data back. If I call this endpoint, I get this data back. And you're just saving examples of what you want that API contract to look like. And so we're still kind of in the planning stage of like, what would it look like to actually go, add an order here? What would we get back as the response and so on? And so this might be like where we actually go order a filet mignon in the body here. So maybe what we're going to send in here is we'll have the dish, and this is going to be the filet mignon, and then maybe we're going to send over like customization, and this could be things like how you want it cooked. So how do you like your filet cooked?
Medium well.
Medium well?
Yeah.
Wow, you go for the tasteless piece of meat and then you overcook it. All right, I see how it is.
So brutal. Something tells me you had a bad restaurant experience. What happened?
No, I like medium rare. I mean, if you're gonna go for the tender cut of meat, cook it tender.
That's too raw for me.
If you're gonna get a tender piece of meat and then cook it till it's really hard, then just get the hard piece of meat and save some money. Arlemy says we shouldn't be on the same line. Shouldn't be on the same live stream together. Thanks for that, Arlemy. So again, this is just the planning stage of like if we're gonna send this body over, then what do we want to get back? So in this case, we'll just send back a success, and we'll just send back a message like your steak will be overcooked and ready in 30 minutes. And we'll send this back as our example response that comes back. So again, for the purpose of the post, the put, and the patch, we have to set this header that says, "Hey, Postman mock server, I also want you to match on the body that I'm sending over here." This would also then allow us to say, if I want to send over an order with a salad, I also get an error condition back. So, for example, with a fillet versus the salad, of which one worked and which one didn't. With a GET request, we could do a similar thing here with the post as well. But for the sake of time, we'll probably skip on that one for now. But the other thing that we need to do is on the request coming back, we also have to make sure that the header coming back on that saved response is also set to application JSON. Sorry, I just realized this is actually this is not on the header. I put this in the wrong spot. So this header actually needs to be on the post itself. So I'm going to come back over here to the form data, and I'm going to set this in here. It's on the response. We actually have to set the content type on the response to make sure that this is coming back as application JSON data. So just to clarify that, so for the sake of sending this over to the mock server, we have to set this on the outgoing request, and then on the response coming back, we have to set the content type of the response header coming back that says that this was application JSON. So let's save this over here as our body.
It looks like we have another question in the meantime, or from the audience.
Which one?
From Psychot. I hope I said that right. I'm sorry. He asked, so it's some kind of documentation, right, for APIs?
This is a way that you're kind of documenting out your API, yeah. So these saved examples will actually end up in API documentation that we'll take a look at here in a moment. I just want to make sure that I'm saving this correctly here as part of that body for sending this over here. Why is it stuck showing me the headers?
So while Ian's working on that, I wanted to also highlight that if you have saved examples with different response status codes, you can send an authenticator request to the mock server along with the X mock response code header. So what we're seeing is Ian adding these headers to different request examples so that when the mock server gets them, it knows, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This is what we want to, this is what I want to find. Another header you can add is X mock response code header, which specifies which integer response code your return response needs to match. So it basically
Yep.
specifies like, I'm looking for this status code, just as another additional tidbit while you're looking at headers for the audience to consider.
Yep. So let's. I think this would be a good point to kind of switch over to GraphQL. So the GraphQL is going to behave very similar to the post operation that we just made for our REST API, but we'll do the same thing with GraphQL over here. The main difference with GraphQL is everything happens as a post operation. But the mock server, again, it's still matching the HTTP method, so get, post, put, patch, delete, as well as the URL and then any parameters. And so anything that we send with GraphQL, we also have to set those headers about, I want you to match the body that we're sending over. Because if we go look at the body of what's happening in GraphQL, we actually have two different components here. We actually have the query that we're calling, and we have like any GraphQL variables that we're sort of sending over here as well. So if we send this over kind of as is right now with our dev environment, which is going and it's hitting like an actual Spotify URL, we actually see a list of like Beach Boys albums that come back. But let's change this up. Isaac, who's your favorite band right now? What do you have on repeat?
The Gorillas.
Gorillas?
Yeah.
With a Z or an S?
Yeah, with a Z.
Z. All right, so we'll send that over. And so, yeah, sure enough, we get a whole bunch of data back. Now, the nice thing with GraphQL is it's up to the consumer to say, this is the data that I want to get back. Where with REST, you kind of end up with like an overfetch or an underfetch where, you don't necessarily know if you're getting all the data back that you want. You don't, you might have to go hit a bunch of endpoints to kind of collect what you need, or the data that you get back is way more than you need. The nice thing with GraphQL is we can come in here and say, okay, I want the name of the album, and maybe I want the image of the album, or like I want the ID of the album. And so it's up to the consumer then to pick, okay, well, now when I get the album back, I also want to get the album ID as well. Or maybe I don't want the ID. Maybe I don't want the image of the artist. And so it's up to the consumer then that allows them to come in and kind of customize the data that they get back. So that's the nice thing with GraphQL here. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this response again as a success. And so we'll call this like a successful endpoint. And again, with the header coming back, we want to set this content type to be application JSON. And on the actual request going out, we have to make sure that we also set that header as well in here for the mock match request body, because everything that happens in GraphQL is going to be in the body. And so this is basically going to tell our mock server, hey, when I send over this request asking for the gorillas, then I want to make sure that I get back this success. So now we can come in here, and again, we can kind of shape this out for whatever we want this to actually look like. The planning for GraphQL is a little bit trickier because you have to know the name of the query that you're going to build, any parameters that you're going to send over, the structure of the data. So the planning around the API contract might be a little more complicated here. And so we'll have a little bit more on some GraphQL stuff in the near future. We've got some live streams coming up and some intergalactics in the works that we're going to be planning out a little bit more around the GraphQL. Okay, so we'll say that if we call gorillas that we get a success, but again, we want to make sure that we have like a good sort of scenario for like error conditions. Again, I'm a big fan of like user experience and so on. We want to make sure that we can also plan for error conditions. So let's put in everybody's favorite person to hate. We're going to go with Justin Bieber here. And if we get a response back for Justin Bieber, we're going to save this response as another example, but maybe this is the example where we get back a 500 error code. So we'll do a 500 internal server error. So again, if we search for gorillas, we get success. If we search for Justin Bieber, then we're going to get an error condition back. And so this could be like our error planning, where we plan out just some kind of message here. Let me scroll all the way down. So there's a lot of albums for Justin Bieber. And we'll just plan out a simple is it too late to tell you I'm sorry? Or the lyric is something along those lines. So now we can basically say, okay, if we search for Justin Bieber, then we're going to get an error back. And so we want to make sure that that one had our 500 error code. If we search for gorillas, that's going to be our success. So let's go change the name of this one, and this will be like our error condition. So again, this is all part of the API contract planning that you want to go through, is you want to plan for success as well as error conditions. Now, as other people were asking, like, can we plan for timeouts and things like that? You can plan for them by status code, but the mock server on Postman, you can't say like, I want this to take 5 seconds to respond, or I want this to respond within 50 milliseconds. We don't really have that level of control on the mock server. But now that we've got all this in place, now we can actually go build a mock server out of this. So the fastest way, or I guess what I would say is the most straightforward way, you could go into mock servers and you could build it out from there. But if you start at the collection level up here and click on the 3 dots, there's an option in here to mock out the whole collection. And so this is going to build one mock server, and it's just going to go do all the things. And we'll just call this mock as our server name. We tell it which collection we're doing. We can tell it which environment we want to use. And so we're going to go in. We're actually going to make a new. Actually, no, we won't store that. But we're going to tell it to mimic this based on the dev environment right now. And then, we can have delays. Oh, this is new. Well, there we go. We can actually set custom network delays.
I was just about to say.
When was this introduced?
I started seeing this very recently.
Wow, kudos to the mock team.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. Like, there is a network delay setting, but I wasn't sure if that was exactly the request that you wanted to make or someone want to make for timeout. But yeah,
it would be nice to do this on a per request level. But in this case, you can actually go make a whole mock server that says, I want this whole, like, I want every endpoint from this mock server to take 5 seconds to come back. That would allow you to plan for like dial-up speeds and so on. Right. Wow, that's great. That's fantastic. I'm so excited they built that out. All right, so we're gonna go build the mock server.
Maybe for the restaurant example, Ian, we can just time out people who want, steak. Medium
who want salad? Medium rare or medium well?
What was the option that you chose?
That I chose?
Yeah, salad.
That you chose, I think. The one that you chose. And let me share the link that there's a way. Postman Echo. Oh, you can add /delay/4 if you want to add a delay by request. Awesome. Thanks, Arlemy, for finding that for us.
Thank you.
So what I've done now is I'm actually going to copy this URL. So this URL is actually our mock server. And we could go hit this in the browser for these get endpoints. We would be able to test this directly in a browser, but we can't really test the post endpoints in a browser. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go build another environment for our mock server. So if we come over to mock server, or go back to environments. Now, it used to be that when we made a mock server, it also made an environment for you at the same time. We stopped doing that a while back. So we're going to go make a new environment here, and we're just going to call this mock server. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use those same variables that we had before of echo URL and Spotify URL. But what I'm going to paste in here instead is our mock server. So now if we come back over to our collection, when we have our get endpoint, what we want to do now is we want to pick our mock server from the environment list. Let's try that again. There we go. There's our mock. And let's see, what did we have here? We had /menu sort meat. So if we call that endpoint now, so we call menu where we were sorting based on meat dishes. If I send this over to our mock server, there's our filet mignon. And notice we got our 200 status code. And so now we could actually go in and we could start building test code for this and say, I expect the data structure to come back and look like this. I expect it to have these elements. Like I expect there to be a price. I expect that price to be greater than 0. Things like that. But if we come in here and we sort based on salad, now we've mocked out our 500 server error. And so something happened on our side. It's not you. Sorry, try again later. And so this exactly mirrors what we're building out as our API contract. And so we've taken that API contract and we've made all kinds of examples about what we want our API contract to be. And now the mock server is just giving us back those examples as is. Same thing with the post. Same thing with the post request over here. So we were calling /orders with the filet mignon. So let's go over here and we're going to change this to orders. We have that body already set up. I already put all this stuff in here. If I send this over, now we got an error here saying that we couldn't match something on the mock server. So something happened in here that we'll go double check what happened. I think that right here, this should have been set to JSON.
I wanted to say real quick, I think it's really cool that you use the environment variable to store that mock server and then call it back in the request, like tying environment and variables all back together like that.
Yeah. So then we don't have to change anything, right? We can kind of interchangeably go back and forth between our dev mode and our mock mode. And then if once we actually start building out our restaurant API and we can like actually send back menu data, then we could make another environment and call it staging or call it production or something like that. And then we can just toggle those different things and say, well, in our mock environment, we expected this, but in production, we're getting back this instead, and maybe those tests don't pass. That gives you that extra level of confidence that, hey, something about the development didn't exactly match our API contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, I think Arlemy asked a question in the chat.
So he was asking about with the mock servers, like not building the environment anymore. I think we still had it as an option. It might be opt-in. If we come back and we look at the mock server and we go build a new one, we'll go back here. We'll start from here. So if we create a new mock, this is basically saying, do you want to set the URL as an environment variable? But that's going to save it in your existing environment. This doesn't make a whole new environment. So I didn't see anything on here for like that you want to create a whole new environment just for the mock. But that's something that used to happen when you created a mock server. It used to make an environment named whatever you called your mock server here. So if I called this Arlemy, for example, it would actually make an environment called Arlemy. We used to do that automatically, and we don't do that anymore. Arlemy says it does. It says under. This will create a new environment. Oh, containing the URL. Oh, you're right. Okay. Yep. Sorry, I missed the tooltip. Thank you, Arlemy, for pointing that out. So yeah, we can save the URL and it will create a new URL, and so you can opt to do that or not. Thanks, Arlemy. I will have to make sure that my documentation gets updated for that. Cool. So we saw on the post operation. So what I had done incorrectly before when I was trying to paste this stuff in is this was sending over as plain text, but again, because we told it to match on the body, the example was coming back, or the saved example that we had was JSON data, not plain text. And so when I sent this over as JSON and we send this over, now we get back our saved response. So similarly, if we go over to to what we were calling with GraphQL. Now, this endpoint is generally going to stay the same. Your organization may change it for how you actually call the GraphQL endpoint as far as the route is concerned. Most GraphQL implementations I've done, you've got a server and then you've got /GraphQL or something very similar to this. And so this won't change. But if we come in here now, for example, and we search for gorillas, if we send this over to our mock server, then we get our gorillas data back. And if we search for Justin Bieber and we send this over, so we also had a failure there. So let's go double check what we were sending over here. So in the headers going out, X mock match request body is set to true. Oh, you know what I think I didn't do is I didn't set the header over here. Yeah, I've got this in the wrong spot. So this needs to not be match request body. This needs to be content type. And this is application JSON. So we got to make sure that we set this header on the saved response coming back. Let's just double check the... Yeah, so the success one was set up properly, but our error condition, I had that header in the wrong spot. So now if we send over for Justin Bieber, no, we still got an error. Did I spell it wrong? B-E-I?
I think you did. Yeah, I think you wrote BEI Bieber. Yeah,
no, that's what I had saved before.
Oh,
that's what I had saved before, though.
Oh, okay.
So why didn't that work?
Hmm.
Let's double check. So X mock match request body set to true. Just make sure I've saved all. Oh, you know what? I didn't actually save this work. So that's the other thing is you got to make sure that you save this stuff in Postman. When you save it, it synchronizes, and then the mock server will actually pick up that change. So now if we try and send this over. Yep. So there's our custom error message coming back.
Nice.
And so this is a really handy way to sort of plan out what you want your API contract to be. Again, if you're not using something like OpenAPI, especially if you're doing something like GraphQL and you don't have like OpenAPI, then you can come in here and you can just start sort of making your own API contract as far as what you want the route to be, what you want your parameters to be, what you're sending over as your body, what you want to get back as that response. And then you've got the opportunity to go add as many of those as you like. So we can come in here and we can add as many of these examples as we like. One thing also that we've done recently is when you're on these saved examples is we've got a try button here. It used to be you had to go back to the original request and hit send, but now we can actually send the try right from that example, and it'll actually send over and give you back your error. So in this case, when we search for Justin Bieber, we get a 500 error. So again, from planning out the user experience, we can say, okay, I know that if I search for filet mignon, we're going to get success. If we search for salad, we're going to get a failure. If I search for gorillas, I get a success. If we search for Justin Bieber, we get an error. This is all really good planning from a user experience point of view, not just the happy path of when I call this route, I get this back. You also want to plan for all those error conditions, and you can build all of that into the mock server. Now, we did a lot of manual effort here, Isaac, for building out this mock server. For the sake of time, we don't really have time to go into this, but with gRPC, if we were building out a gRPC API, when you add that proto file inside of Postman, it'll automatically spin up a mock server for you. So I won't go into too much more detail on that, but there is a way within gRPC when you're building out the gRPC APIs, it'll spin up that mock server for you automatically and allow you to start customizing those responses and so on.
Nice.
Cool. So we're happy to take any other questions from chat about like how we set this up and what these requests and responses were and how you're saving all of these things. Again, if you're sending over a body, you got to make sure that you're sending this header. So if we were actually building this out, so if I were the front-end developer and I was going to go build this restaurant application, I have to make sure that if I'm talking to my mock server that I also send this header over saying, you know, I'm sending you a bunch of data in the body. I also want you to match on that. Same thing with headers. If you have customized headers that you want to match for a particular response, because maybe you're setting something in the header that will manipulate the type of response or how the response comes back, then you can also match on the request headers as well. But that's only to talk to the mock server. Once you change over to like your staging or your production, you won't need to send this header any longer. You won't need to send that from your application. You only need that for talking to the Postman server for the mocks.
This is really cool, Ian. I had a question, just like a
Yeah.
really open-ended one. Everyone in the chat can feel free to like give their answer here. So, like looking at the bigger after we've like seen this really awesome kit and walked along the awesome demo that you gave us here with mock servers and examples for both REST API and GraphQL. A question that I had was, so and going into the topic of why this like really helps out you, the developer, or anyone else who needs this. I'm curious, like, so is this like a really awesome way to get tasks done faster or to boost productivity? I know as a developer myself, I sometimes ask myself, like, how can I get this task done faster, or
Right.
is there a way I can boost my productivity? Yeah, just anyone else who just open ended for anyone or for you to answer.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as a developer myself, I'm always looking for productivity hacks to do things more efficiently. I've certainly been on a lot of teams in my career where it's like, okay, we need an endpoint. Okay, let's plan that one endpoint, and then, we go and we rush to go build it. Meanwhile, other people are kind of sitting around waiting for us. So the productivity hack with this specifically is now as a front end developer, I've got everything that I need. I can go start building my application, even though the back end team doesn't have that API ready. As a front end developer, as a mobile developer, I have a mock server that I can go hit, and it's going to give me back the data that I need. Or at least that we've planned for. Now, when you actually wire it up and you actually talk to like the real production system, that's where it's like, okay, is it actually working? But if you build this out with a mock server, now anybody that would normally be sitting around waiting for that API to actually get developed, they've got a mock server in place with that API contract that they can say, okay, let's take this and we can start building against it. So same kind of thing if you were building out like an OpenAPI spec, where you can go in and you can build the collection. You can go in and you can actually just call the Postman Echo or call the Spotify GraphQL if you're doing GraphQL, and start saving those responses and then shape those into what you expect your API contract to actually be. Now you can actually spin that up as a mock server, and now you can actually start building your application much faster while the team is taking their time and building out the API properly. It's not that they're not rushed and that they don't have to be in a hurry anymore, but sometimes with speed, you make mistakes and you can introduce bugs by doing things too quickly. And so the secondary sort of productivity hack here is you could end up with fewer bugs because you've planned out this API. You can commit a Postman, you can add testing in here that we can say, okay, what we planned out in Postman, all those tests pass. When we actually call production, do those tests still pass? Right now, your backend team, they can also come back and forth between the mock environment and their actual, local development environment as they're actually building it out. And are those responses actually the same? And then they can kind of use that as another level of API testing to make sure that what they're actually building out for that API contract is matching properly. So then when you actually connect these pieces and the front end or the mobile app actually hits the real API, you've got stronger confidence that everything's going to work. And so it's kind of a double productivity that the other developers can get to work faster, but then you're less likely to have bugs when you actually integrate the real thing later on. And you can save time there too.
Love that. Love saving time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some things in my career. So like having this kind of tooling back, even 10 years ago would have been a game changer for some of the organizations that I was in, where it would have made building out APIs and planning out the APIs much easier, much faster. The other thing that we kind of alluded to earlier is around documentation. So the nice thing with this is now that we've got our API endpoints and our examples saved, If we come back over to the entire collection and we look at the documentation here, if you were actually building this out as an actual, let me go through the full documentation. If you were actually building this out as an API, if we scroll down to where these endpoints actually live, now you've got, you've got full documentation now of this is what we want the body to be, and here's an example of how to send this over in different kinds of codes. So if you want to start building out SDKs, you can come in and you can change the language. You can say, okay, we want to write an SDK in JavaScript, so here's what the request is going to look like. Here's and then what the response is going to look like. We actually document all of that, and that documentation updates immediately as you come back and you change these examples. So as you change the example or you add more examples in here, the mock server will update right away, but the documentation will also update right away. And so you can come in here and you can say, I want an example of a success, or I want an example of a failure condition. So if we come back up to the get endpoint, so here was our success, but we can also plan out like what does it look like for a server error. We can see here, okay, well, if you sort by salad, then you should get an error back that looks like this. So as soon as we create those examples, now you've got all this stuff documented as well. And so that'll also save you a bunch of time as far as like how do we actually get our team to start building this stuff.
That's really cool. I find that awesome that Postman docs update dynamically. I feel like that should be the standard for every library.
For sure. Yeah, and then coming in and say, okay, well, we want to build an SDK in, say Python or something. So we've got a lot of different languages in here that you can come through and say, okay, I want to use the request library in Python. Well, boom, here's your sample code of like how to actually go call that endpoint. And if you're, again, if you sort by salad, you're going to get this back as your error condition. And if you want an example of what it looks like with success, then, it shows you that example here. So it's taking those examples and automatically building out your documentation for you. So all we have to do is like literally if we come in here, if we just duplicate this and we go back to that documentation page, and we scroll all the way down. So now we've got success with parameter 1. There's the other copy. Like the documentation's immediately available. And the mock server, within a few seconds, now we've also updated the mock server as well. So as soon as you start adding other examples, all of this stuff gets updated kind of behind the scenes for you. So again, productivity hack, all the documentation is done for you. We had a question come in here. Can you share the test script documentation to test GraphQL APIs? So there should be, actually, yeah, maybe Arlemy, if you've got a moment, if you can post that in chat, or Rohit, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, where you asked the question, if you want to connect with me over there, I can try and find you that documentation link. But typically the testing around GraphQL endpoints is going to be very similar as far as actually writing out the test code, where we've got all these little snippets, and you can say, I expect there to be a 200, and then I expect that the response body, has a particular kind of structure. You can have like timings around it and things like that. And so in this case, you can actually build out your chai test here to say, I expect that the structure that comes back matches a particular structure. Now that's going to be on a whole request, not on a per example basis. And so you have to be careful when you're writing the tests that way. If you're testing different things, like if I was testing Justin Bieber for this one, can I test that I get a 500 back? Or do I test that I get a 200 or 201 back from GraphQL? That would be a little bit trickier to try to manage from a test point of view. You'd have to look at what you're sending over and like build out your test code in different ways that, when I call Justin Bieber, like a bunch of my tests don't fail just because I got a mock back. So you typically wouldn't use the mock server with your testing because the mock server is just going to give you back exactly what you expected. But when you actually call the real server, then your tests would typically be your happy path. Like I expect that it came back as a 200 and that it matched a particular structure and so on.
Amazing.
Awesome. Well, we like to wrap up our live streams with community shoutouts. So Isaac, I know you're a big fan of the student community and stuff, the team that you work in. So tell us a little bit about what you got going on. You mentioned that there's an event coming up that you're helping plan out. So tell us a little bit about that.
For sure, for sure. By the way, I sent the link I wanted to share in the super secret chat that you and I have.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you, Ian, for a really awesome demo. Thank you, Devrel. Amazing streams as always. So, as I said, my name is Isaac, and I'm a developer advocate on the Postman student programs team. So basically, our mission is to help you keep learning about APIs and Postman. And with our student expert program, you can get certified as a Postman student expert. Everyone who completes the certification program will receive a digital badge, which you can add to your resume and your LinkedIn profile. You can sign up for the training as an individual or invite your professor to sign up for the Postman Classroom program, which will enable them to share the curriculum with your whole class and monitor student progress. And you will also be eligible for a free Postman plan for your class. So those are just some of the perks. By following the link that Ian shared, you can sign up to register to get more information and be a part of our community. You'll also be invited to join our Postman student community Discord server for support, fun community events, live streams like this, and giveaways. You can also reach out to us with any questions about student programs at this email, which I will share with Ian. It is studentprogram@postman.com. And in terms of our next live stream event, so I'll be live streaming with my coworker Ruby on Tuesday, March 21st. We'll have more information to share about our live stream coming soon. You can find out more by registering at that link Ian shared or emailing us. And yeah, and we hope to see you soon in our community and hope to see you get certified as a Postman student expert.
Awesome. I'm going to drop my link in here. So we've got these fun monthly webinars that we do called Intergalactic, and we've got one coming up on building low-code applications specifically with Postman flows. So if you saw the live stream that we did recently around the sentiment analysis and the IoT lights, we were using flows inside of Postman. We're going to be doing a whole webinar just on a demo of how that actually works. So we got that coming up on March 22nd, Wednesday, March 22nd. And so you can register for that for free. Those videos do get shared out. We have the webinar over Zoom, but we also make those videos available on YouTube after the fact. And so you're welcome to register for those. Anybody that registers will get a copy of the video automatically through Zoom. But we also put those videos up on our YouTube channel as well. We also live stream every week, so we've got a live stream coming up next week. We're going to be talking about server-side events and how we actually built some of that stuff. So next week is going to be how we built it. So we've got lots of live streams. Our team live streams at this time every week. We try to do it every single week. And like I mentioned, we've got a bunch of really neat stuff around some of the changes that we made around GraphQL. We've got some live streams this month towards the end of March, specifically to GraphQL, and working with some partners and sort of how we built out some of the GraphQL support. So definitely come back and check those out. As always, if you've got questions, you can reach out to us on Twitter. We are Get Postman on Twitter. You've also got my Twitter handle right here. You're welcome to reach out to me and connect with me. I use the same handle on LinkedIn and Twitter if you want to connect and ask questions. I'm happy to help out. And we've also got a great community forum as well. You can check out the Postman community. We got lots of different forum channels in there. If you've got specific questions about, hey, I'm trying to do this thing in Postman, can I get some help with some code? Our DevRel team likes hanging out in there and offering help with little code snippets and so on. So you can always drop in and ask us those kinds of questions. So any questions that we couldn't address that we had in chat today, definitely go hit up our community forum. We're happy to help you out there. Isaac, thanks again for hanging out with me today. It was great chatting a little bit. And sorry to tease you so much about your food choices, but it's all in good fun.
This was awesome. I had fun, Ian. Thank you for inviting me. Wow.
Yeah.
Can't wait for the DevRel events that are coming. It sounds like you guys are all like an API, no rest. Super excited to be in your next streams. And yeah, thank you everyone for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. We'll catch you next time on the live stream, and have a great day. Take care.
Take care. Bye.